What the water knew. The storm didn't announce itself. That's the thing nobody tells you about the Gulf of Mexico in late September. The forecasts say manageable. The charter captain says we'll be fine. The sky at 4 p.m. looks the way skies look when they have not yet decided what they are going to do. And then, somewhere around midnight, the decision gets made, and by the time you know it, you're already inside it. Ryan Mercer had been on the water long enough to know the difference between a storm you could reason with and one you couldn't. This was the second kind. He knew it at 11:47 p.m. when the swells went from 6 feet to 11 in under 20 minutes and the Crestwood Lady, a 38-foot charter vessel out of Port Aransas, Texas, started doing things that 38-foot vessels were not designed to do. The other person on board was a woman named Caroline Briggs. She was 49 years old, the senior managing partner of Briggs Calloway Consulting in Houston, and she had chartered the boat for a solo overnight trip because she had explained to the captain before departure she needed 36 hours without her phone. She had gotten considerably more than that. Ryan was not the captain. The captain, a man named Garrett Fuller, who had been running these waters for 19 years, had taken a wave over the port side at 11:52 p.m. and gone into the water before Ryan could get to him. Ryan had spent 4 minutes trying. He had the safety line in his hand. He had the spotlight. He had the specific, focused desperation of a man who understands that the next 60 seconds are the only seconds that matter. It wasn't enough. The Gulf took Garrett Fuller at 11:56 p.m. and did not give him back. Ryan stood at the stern in the rain and understood, with a completeness that left no room for anything else, that there were now 2 people on this boat, and one of them did not know how to operate it, and the other one was going to have to figure out the next 30 minutes very carefully, or neither of them was going home. Caroline Briggs was there, gripping the console with both hands, her face the color of the walls. She was not screaming. You would remember that later, that she was not screaming, that she had the presence to be terrified quietly, which is harder than it sounds. "Can you drive a boat?" he said. "No." "Then hold that." He put her hands on the wheel and positioned them at 9 and 3. "Don't turn it. Just hold it exactly where it is. Feel what the water does and resist it. Don't overcorrect." "Where are you going?" "Deploy the life raft. If I'm not back in 4 minutes, pull this handle." He pointed to the emergency beacon activation. "Red handle. You couldn't miss it. Pull it and don't let go of the wheel." She looked at the handle. She looked at him. She said, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. He was back in 3. The life raft went into the water at 12:09 a.m. Getting Caroline Briggs into it was a negotiation, not because she was uncooperative, but because the deck was pitching at an angle that made every movement a problem in physics, and she was wearing deck shoes that had no business being on a boat in these conditions. And at one point she went down hard on her left knee, and Ryan caught her by the forearm and pulled her up and kept moving because stopping was not an option. She got in. He got in. He cut the tether at 12:11 a.m. The Crestwood Lady was still running when they lost sight of her. He didn't know how long she stayed up after that. He didn't look back again. There was nothing useful in looking back. He activated the EPR beacon. Green light. Steady pulse. Someone at the Coast Guard station in Corpus Christi was going to see that signal appear on a screen in the next few minutes and begin calculating a response time. He ran the math in his head. Best case, 4 hours. More likely, 6. Possible 8. He checked the emergency kit. Water, 3 liters. Rations. Flare gun with 4 cartridges. Thermal blankets. He handed one to Caroline Briggs, and she took it without a word and wrapped it around her shoulders with the efficient movements of a person who has decided that the situation is what it is, and survival requires cooperation with reality. The storm continued. They didn't speak for the first hour. There was no point. The wind made conversation impossible, and conversation was not what either of them needed. What they needed was to not capsize, and Ryan managed that by reading the swells and using the paddle as a rudder, keeping the raft angled into the waves rather than broadside, which was the difference between staying afloat and not. Caroline Briggs watched him work. She did not ask questions. She shifted her weight when he said shift and held the rope when he said hold, and did not do the thing that some people did in survival situations, which was to make the other person's job harder by needing to talk about their feelings. Around 2 a.m., the storm began to lose its conviction. The swells flattened from 11 feet to 7. The rain went from a wall to a curtain. The curtain became a sheet. The sheet became a drizzle. Ryan sat back against the raft wall. His shoulder, the left one, the one that had never fully healed after what happened in 2019, was sending its usual message. He acknowledged it and set it aside. "Are we going to be okay?" Caroline Briggs said. "Yes. You sound certain. The beacon is active. The storm is passing. Someone is looking for us right now." He paused. "We're going to be cold and uncomfortable for a few more hours. That's the worst of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Garrett." "Yes." She didn't say anything else, neither did he. There wasn't anything to say that would improve on the silence. He pulled the thermal blanket tighter around his own shoulders. The gulf had gone down to 4-foot swells, manageable, the kind of water you could be in and not fear. Thought about Jennifer. He thought about her the way he had trained himself to think about her over the last 4 years, not with the raw, open wound of the first year, not with the suffocating weight of the second, but with the particular, steady grief of a man who has learned to carry something without putting it down. You don't put it down. You just learn to walk with it. Jennifer had been gone 4 years and 3 months. Their daughter, the one who came early, who weighed 2 pounds and 14 ounces, who lived for 8 days in the NICU at Houston Methodist before her body decided it had done everything it could. She had been gone 4 years and 3 months and 6 days. He did not count on purpose. He simply knew. He looked at the beacon light. Green, green, green. He waited. Across the raft, Caroline Briggs had her eyes closed. Not sleeping, her breathing was too deliberate for sleep. Just conserving, he respected that. He did the same. The gulf rocked them gently now, the way water does when the violence has passed and it has returned to its default state of indifference. Stars were appearing above them, punching through the breaking clouds one at a time. He watched them appear. He thought Jennifer would have had something to say about the stars. She always did. She had studied astronomy for 2 years before switching to architecture, and she never entirely left the first field. She just carried it into the second one, the way certain people carry everything they learn into everything they do after. He thought, "I am still here," he thought. "That is enough for right now." The Coast Guard found them at 6:23 a.m. Ryan spent 11 days in Port Aransas after that. There were statements to give, paperwork, a formal inquiry into the loss of the Crestwood lady and the death of Garrett Fuller. He gave his account 4 times to 3 different people, and each time he told it the same way because it was the same story, and he was not the kind of man who changed a story based on the audience. Caroline Briggs gave her account twice and left on the second day. She shook Ryan's hand in the parking lot of the Coast Guard station, which was a gesture so formally inadequate to the situation that it almost became funny, and she said, "You kept your head. That mattered." And he said, "So did you." And she got in a car that her assistant had driven down from Houston, and she left. He did not expect to see her again. That was fine. Survival was not a relationship. It was a shared event, and shared events did not obligate the people who shared them to anything beyond the event itself. He drove back to Houston in his truck over 2 days, stopping in Corpus Christi in 3 weeks. He had a job interview in a structural engineering consultancy on Westheimer Road called Caldwell and Morrow Partners, which was one of the 3 firms in Houston that worked at the level he needed to work at if he was going to rebuild what the last 4 years had interrupted. He went home. He made coffee. He found his portfolio. He sat at the kitchen table and went through it the way he went through things methodically, without rushing. The way a person works when they understand that the work itself is the point and not the pace of it. He had been rebuilding for 2 years. This was the next step. He was ready for the next step. Caldwell and Morrow Partners occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass tower on Westheimer Road in Houston's Galleria district. The lobby had the specific expensive neutrality of places that had decided their aesthetic was the absence of aesthetics: travertine floors, ambient lighting, a reception desk that was approximately the length of a shipping container, staffed by a young woman named Ashley, who managed the visitor log with the focused competence of someone who had been told that first impressions were the firm's business and took this seriously. Ryan arrived at 9:33 a.m., 12 minutes early. He wore the dark jacket pressed, clean, the left sleeve long enough to cover the scar that the Gulf had left on his forearm. He carried the portfolio under his arm. He had printed everything the night before, because preparation was the one form of control available to a man walking into a room that hadn't decided about him yet. He signed in. He sat. He did not look at his phone. The lobby smelled like chilled air, and the specific ambition of a firm that had been profitable long enough to stop advertising the fact. There were project photographs on the walls. The Bayou Greenways infrastructure study, the Midtown Houston mixed-use corridor, the Galveston seawall reinforcement project that had been cited in 3 engineering journals, and which Ryan had read about with the particular attention of someone who understood exactly what it had taken to do it right. He had opinions about the seawall project. He kept them to himself. Mr. Mercer? A woman in a gray blazer appeared at the elevator bank. Mid-30s, efficient posture, visitor badge already prepared. I'm the associate director's assistant. She's ready for you. He followed her into the elevator. The 14th floor opened into a corridor lined with the kind of technical drawings that told you, immediately, that the people who worked here, understood the difference between a drawing that looked good and a drawing that was correct. Ryan looked at them as he passed. He noticed 3 things. He kept them to himself. The office at the end of the corridor had a glass wall facing the Houston skyline downtown to the east, the Galleria towers behind and below, the specific flat sprawl of a city that had grown in every direction at once and was still going. The woman at the desk was looking at a document when he was shown in. She looked up. Ryan Mercer stopped, not visibly, not in a way she would have seen, but something in him went completely still, the way things still when the information arriving is not the information expected. The woman at the desk was Caroline Briggs. She was in a different register entirely from the woman he had last seen in a Coast Guard parking lot in Port Aransas 11 days ago. Blazer, reading glasses on a chain, hair arranged, the full professional architecture of a person who ran things. There was nothing in her face that indicated she recognized him. She had her interview face on. He had his. He sat down. He kept his voice level. She did not know him. He understood this within the first 30 seconds. She had been in shock for most of those 9 hours on the water. The last time she had seen his face, clearly, was in the wheelhouse in the dark, in the rain, with the boat pitching and Garrett Fuller already in the water. He had been wearing a rain hood. She had been terrified. The brain in that state does not store faces reliably. He knew this. He was not offended by it. He was, however, going to have to decide in the next 3 minutes what to do with the information. Ryan Mercer, she said, reading from the folder, senior structural engineer, currently consulting independently. That's right. You have a gap in your continuous employment. She turned a page. From 2019 through 2021. Yes. The nature of the gap? Personal loss. My wife passed away. There was a period during which I was not working at capacity. She made a note. The note was the sound of a category being assigned. He recognized it. He had heard it before, in other offices, other folders, other women and men who had decided before the information arrived what the information meant. The gap raises questions, she said, about continuity, about whether someone returning from an extended absence at 41 is going to be current on methodology and practice. I understand why it would. She looked at him over the folder. The look had the specific texture of a person who had already decided but was performing due diligence. Your most recent project credit is the Riverway East Commercial Development. That's 14 months ago. Correct. Before the gap, you were project lead on the federal levy compliance assessment for Harris County. 18 months, federal contract. Yes. That's significant work. It was. Which makes the gap more, she paused, more puzzling. Ryan looked at her. He set the portfolio on the desk, not urgently. With both hands, the deliberate placement of something that has been carried carefully and is being set down in the right place. May I ask you something directly? He said. She gestured. Go ahead. Has the position been filled? Not yet. Then I'd like to show you what I brought. She sat back slightly. The gesture was so small it was almost invisible, but it was there, the fractional recalibration of a person who was expecting capitulation and received something else instead. All right, she said. He opened the portfolio. He laid the documents on the desk in order. The Harris County assessment, the full one, not the executive summary, with his methodology notes in the margins. The independent structural review he had completed for the Port of Houston Authority the previous year, which had identified a load-bearing inconsistency in the Barber's Cut terminal expansion that had saved an estimated $1 million in deferred failure costs. The continuing education certificates current, all of them, every credit from every course he had taken in the 2 years since he came back, which was more continuing education than most working engineers logged in for. And then the last document. He placed it on the desk and did not say anything immediately. He let her pick it up. It was a project report. At the top, Caldwell and Morrow Partners, internal header. A subcontract structural review from 2020. The scope, foundation assessment for the Westheimer Tower renovation project, this building. The one they were sitting in, the one she ran out of every day. His name was in the peer review box at the bottom of page 3. His signature. His license number. He had reviewed the foundation of the building she sat in every day, 2 years before she had ever seen his face. Caroline Briggs read the document. She got to page 3. She stopped. She set it down. She picked it up again. "You reviewed this building," she said. "The foundation assessment on the parking structure renovation. 2020. There was a question about the load transfer at the northeast corner of the B2 level." He paused. "There still is, actually. Whoever addressed it, addressed the visible portion. The transfer mechanism at the anchor plate level was not corrected. I noticed it on the way in this morning." The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of an interview. The silence of a room that has understood something. "You noticed it this morning," she said. "Flat. Processing. I notice things about structures. It's not a choice. It's just how I look at buildings." He paused. "I'm telling you because it's your building and because that's what you'd be hiring me to do, tell you what I see before it becomes a problem." Caroline Briggs put the document down on the desk. She looked at the man across from her, really looked, for the first time in the conversation, past the jacket and the gap and the category she had been building since he walked in. Something moved across her face, not recognition. Not yet. Something slower and more complicated, the specific expression of a person whose existing story about a situation is quietly falling apart and who is beginning to understand that the new story is going to require different assumptions. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to make a call." She stood. She left the room. Ryan sat. He looked at the Houston skyline through the glass wall, downtown to the east, the flat spread of the city. The sky above it, cloudless and blue, the way October skies in Houston were blue completely, without apology. He thought about Garrett Fuller. He thought about the water at midnight. He thought about a woman gripping a ship's wheel in the dark and not screaming and doing exactly what he told her to do. He thought, she did not look at me on that boat and see a category. She looked at me and saw the person who knew what to do next. He thought, that version of her is still in there. He waited. She was gone for 11 minutes. When she came back, she was not alone. The man with her was in his early 60s, silver hair, rolled sleeves, the look of someone who had started the firm rather than inherited it. His name was Frank Caldwell, and he was, Ryan understood immediately, the person whose opinion actually determined what happened next. Frank Caldwell did not sit behind the desk. He sat in the chair beside Ryan, which rearranged the room entirely. He said, "Caroline tells me you reviewed our foundation in 2020, the B2 level, and you identified a current corner on the way in. And you identified a current issue this morning on the way in. Anchor plate at the load transfer point. The surface remediation was done, but the underlying transfer mechanism wasn't addressed. It's not critical yet. It will be in 18 to 24 months." Frank Caldwell looked at him the way experienced people look at things they are reassessing. "Walk me through your background, not the resume, the actual story." Ryan told him. He told him about the Harris County project. He told him about Jennifer, not all of it, just the shape of it, just enough for the silence it deserved. He told him about the 2 years of coming back. He told him it plainly. The way you tell a true thing when you have told it enough times to know that the plain version is the one that lands. Frank Caldwell listened. He did not fill the spaces. He just listened. When Ryan finished, Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had a partner die in 2011, David Morrow. You know the name from the door. 44 years old, heart attack in this office. I took 2 years. Came back different. He looked at Ryan steadily. Not worse. Different. Ryan nodded. The work you did in 2020 on our parking structure, Caldwell said. That was good work. I remember the report. Thank you. I didn't know who did it. The subcontract ran through Morrison and Lee. He paused. I should have known who did it. They sat with that for a moment. The Houston skyline held its position. Caroline Briggs had not moved from the doorway. She was watching the two men talk with the expression of someone who had walked into a scene already in progress and was recalculating her understanding of every element in it. Then something else happened on her face. Something slower and more interior, like a mechanism that had been running underground suddenly surfacing. She said quietly, Port Aransas. Ryan looked at her. 10 days ago, she said. Her voice had changed. The professional register was gone. What was underneath it was quieter and less certain. The Crestwood lady. The storm. Yes, he said. She stared at him. I didn't. She stopped. I didn't recognize you. I know. You were wearing a rain hood. It was dark. You were in shock. She crossed the room. She stood in front of his chair and looked at him the way she had not looked at him since he walked in, without the folder, without the assessment, without the professional machinery of a person who decided about people for a living. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the wheelhouse at midnight when the boat was breaking and Garrett Fuller was already gone. And he had said, hold it exactly where it is, and she had held it. You saved my life, she said. You saved my life, she said. You saved your own life, he said. I just told you where to put your hands. She sat down, not in her chair. In the empty chair to his left, the chair that someone would put in front of a fireplace. She sat in it, the way a person sits when the formality of the situation has left the room, and what remains is just two people. I was going to turn you away, she said. This morning, before you showed me the documents, I had already decided. I know, because of the jacket. Because of the gap, she said it without softening it. He respected that. I looked at you and I built a story and I was going to send you home. People do that, he said. I know people do that. I did it. That's not the same as saying it's acceptable. She looked at the folder on the desk, the one with his resume in it, the one she had been reading from when he walked in. The man who was calm enough in a storm to save my life. I looked at him this morning and decided he wasn't credentialed enough to consult for my firm. The room was quiet. That's going to take me a while to sit with, she said. Take all the time you need, Ryan said, not unkindly, simply. Frank Caldwell, who had been silent since Caroline Briggs said, Port Aransas, stood up. He looked at Ryan with the uncomplicated directness of a man who had built things for 40 years and trusted his own judgment about what was worth building. Monday morning, he said. 8 o'clock. Bring the parking structure notes and we'll talk about the Rollway East project. We'll talk about what the roll looks like. Ryan nodded. I'll be here. Caldwell left the room, not quickly with the unhurried certainty of someone who had done what needed doing. Caroline Briggs did not leave. She sat in the chair beside him and looked at the skyline for a moment, and Ryan let her look, because some things needed looking at before they could be talked about. Garrett Fuller's family, she said finally. I've been in contact with them. I'm establishing a scholarship in his name at the Marine Training Program at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. She stopped. It won't fix anything, but it's what I can do. It's a good thing to do, Ryan said. She nodded. She stood. She extended her hand, and this time the gesture was not inadequate to the situation. It was exactly adequate. It was the specific handshake of two people who had been through something together and were now in a different kind of room, deciding to keep going. He shook it. Monday, she said. Monday, he said. What happened after that happened the way real consequences happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of smaller ones, each one arriving because the one before it had made room for it. Caroline Briggs called the chairman of Caldwell and Morrow's board that same afternoon and told him, accurately, that she had nearly turned away one of the most qualified structural engineers she had ever interviewed because he was wearing a jacket she had decided meant something it did not mean. She told him this not as a confession, but as information, the kind of information that a firm needed to have about its own hiring practices if it wanted to keep hiring well. The chairman listened. He asked 3 questions. He said he would have the HR director contact her about reviewing the firm's intake protocol. The HR director contacted her 2 days later. The intake protocol review took 3 weeks and resulted in 4 changes, 2 of which were structural, the kind of change that affects process rather than intention, which is the only kind of change that actually sticks. Caroline Briggs did not keep her job because of this. She kept her job because she was good at it. But she understood her job differently after October than she had before, and the difference was not theoretical. It was specific, and it lived in the particular memory of a man's face in a doorway, in the rain, saying, 4 minutes, and the way she had trusted him completely in that moment without needing anything from him except the truth. She had not given him that, not in her office, not until the document was on the desk, and the walls were already coming down. She thought about that. She thought about it for a long time. Ryan Mercer started at Caldwell and Morrow on a Monday morning in October, on the 14th floor of a building on Westheimer Road, whose parking structure he had reviewed 2 years before anyone in the building knew his name. He took the stairs. He had always taken the stairs in buildings he had assessed. It was the fastest way to understand the bones of a thing, the way the weight moved, where the load went. He made coffee in the kitchen on 14. He stood at the window that faced downtown and drank it. He thought about Jennifer. He thought about their daughter. He thought about the Gulf at 2 a.m. and the orange raft and the green light blinking in the dark. He thought, I kept the promise. He set the mug down. He picked up the parking structure file. He began. There is a kind of mistake that doesn't feel like a mistake when you're making it. It feels like experience. It feels like efficiency. It feels like the entirely reasonable judgment of a person who has seen enough to know what things mean before they have to ask. Caroline Briggs had made that mistake for a long time. She had made it so many times that she had stopped noticing she was making it. She looked at people and she saw the surface and she ran the calculation and she moved on, because that was what you did when you had a firm to run and decisions to make, and more candidates than positions and not enough hours to look at everything. She understood now that the calculation was only as good as what you fed into it, that if you fed it the jacket and the gap and the first 3 seconds and nothing else, the answer you got was not a judgment. It was a mirror. It showed you your own assumptions and called them insight. Ryan Mercer had known who he was before he walked into her office. He had known it in the parking lot of the hospital in Port Aransas, signing the discharge papers with the same hand that had deployed the life raft. He had known it at the kitchen table with the portfolio, preparing for a room that hadn't met him yet. The room's opinion of him had been wrong. His opinion of himself had not required the room's correction. But she had offered it anyway. On the 14th floor of a building he had already reviewed, with the Houston skyline behind her and Frank Caldwell in the next room, and the document with his signature still on the desk between them. She had looked again. She had said, I was looking at the wrong things. That was the work. Not the apology, though the apology mattered. The work was the looking again, the willingness to pick up the folder and read it differently. To let the new information overwrite the first impression instead of the other way around. Most people don't do that. Most people make the first impression permanent and find evidence to confirm it and call the process judgment. Caroline Briggs had almost done that. She hadn't. And in the distance between those two outcomes, the space between almost and didn't, was the whole of what this story is about. The ocean doesn't care who you are. That part was true. But rooms do. Rooms are made of people. And people have the choice that the ocean doesn't, the choice to look again, to see past the surface, to say, I was wrong, and here is what I owe you for that. Ryan Mercer fixed structures for a living. He knew what held things up. He understood, in the most precise and practical terms, that every structure had load paths you couldn't see from the outside, and that the failure points were always in the places nobody thought to look until something gave. He understood this about buildings. He had learned it was also true of people. He picked up his pencil. He began. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of a room where someone looked at you and didn't see you, or if you've been the one doing the looking and you know, honestly, that you were looking at the wrong things, share it with one person. That is enough. One person who needs to hear that the room being wrong about you is not the same as you being wrong about yourself. And if you have ever been the one who stopped, who looked again, who said I was wrong and meant it, leave that in the comments. It costs something to do that. It is worth naming. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. All characters, names, institutions, and events are fictional or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. This story is not intended to represent any real individual or organization.